At my mom's funeral, my landlord grumbled, she died owing me 2 months' rent. My neighbor scoffed, she was always playing the victim. Then a stranger in a lab coat said, because of her, my daughter survived cancer. The room stopped breathing. At my mom's funeral, my landlord leaned over and whispered, she died owing me 2 months' rent. A neighbor muttered, she always played the victim. I was about to walk out when a stranger in a lab coat stood up and said, because of her, my daughter survived cancer. That moment stopped everything. I realized I didn't really know who my mother was, and it's changed the way I see everything, her, myself, and the life I thought she ruined. I've been holding on to this story for a while, unsure if it even belonged in a place like this. But relationships aren't just about lovers and spouses, they're about family, about the people who raised us, hurt us, disappointed us, and sometimes quietly saved us without our ever realizing it. My name's Raven. I'm 42, no kids, divorced twice, no plans for a third round. Born and raised in Yonkers, New York, and now living in Buffalo. I work remote as a caseworker for a nonprofit that helps domestic violence survivors. Funny thing is, I never thought of my own past as something that needed healing until I stood in a chapel staring at an urn that used to be my mother. Her name was Letitia Mendez. That name probably doesn't mean anything to anyone. But to me, it was once synonymous with drama, chaos, and guilt. Growing up with her was like living with a thunderstorm, bright, loud, beautiful in its unpredictability, but dangerous if you got too close. She wasn't cruel, but she was sharp. Not abusive, just exhausting. I used to dread coming home from school because I never knew if I'd find her meditating with crystals or yelling at the television because she swore the weatherman was sending her messages. Our house was always a mess. Emotionally and physically. There were months the power got cut. She'd light candles and call it spiritual cleansing. I'd sit in the dark and wonder why other kids got spaghetti dinners and working microwaves while I was boiling hot dogs in a kettle on a camp stove. My dad left when I was 9. Took his new wife and moved to Atlanta. I stayed. My mother told me she was the one who chose me, and he didn't deserve us anyway. I believed her. For a while. But over the years, I started seeing things differently. Like how she always seemed to find someone to blame. How she could never keep a job for long but insisted she was too real for corporate life. How she cried when she couldn't pay rent but still bought tarot decks and healing crystals off eBay. By the time I was in college, we barely talked. I sent her money occasionally, but only because I didn't want to feel guilty if something happened to her. That's the truth. That's the part one hate admitting most. So when I got the call that she passed, complications from COPD, I didn't cry. I made arrangements, took time off work, booked a rental car. I told myself I was being responsible. Not grieving. Just responsible. The funeral was small. A modest chapel on Warburton Avenue, just a few blocks from where she lived the last 10 years of her life. It was gray and raining, of course. I joked to myself that even the sky wasn't sure how to feel about her. There were maybe 20 people there. Some from her building, a few old co-workers from St. Joseph's, and a handful of unfamiliar faces. I stood near the front, next to the urn, pretending to feel something deeper than confusion. That's when Mr. Capella, her landlord, leaned toward me. She died still owing me 2 months' rent, he muttered, like it was a confession. I didn't respond. What could I say? Thanks for sharing? A few minutes later, as people started offering stories or memories, Mrs. Blanding, her upstairs neighbor, stood up with a sigh. She was always playing the victim, she said. Nice enough when she wanted to be. But always some crisis. Always someone else's fault. I braced myself for more of the same. I was almost relieved. At least people were seeing her clearly. Not canonizing her the way people tend to do at funerals. But then a man in a white coat, a stranger, stood up. I didn't know her personally, he said, voice steady but quiet. But because of her, my daughter survived cancer. The air went completely still. He explained that he was a doctor. Dr. Sarveshyangar. His daughter had been diagnosed with leukemia a few years ago. The treatment they needed wasn't covered. They were out of options. One day, out of nowhere, an anonymous donation arrived, enough to cover the exact cost of the medication. He said they eventually traced the donor, a woman named Letitia Mendez, working in hospital admin, who never told anyone. She never told me. I don't know what broke me more, knowing she'd done something so profoundly selfless, or realizing that she never felt the need to be seen for it. After the service, more people came forward. Not many. But enough. A young man with track marks on his arms who said she helped him find a bed in a rehab program and called him every night for 2 weeks afterward. An elderly woman who lived 2 doors down who said Letitia used to bring her groceries during lockdown and refused to take a dime. Even a nurse from St. Joseph's said she used to pick up Letitia's late shifts during the holidays so she could spend time with her daughter. That one hit hardest. I hadn't visited her for Christmas in 10 years. I didn't know what to do with all this. I felt like a stranger to my own mother. Back at her apartment, I started going through her things. The place smelled like lavender and cigarette smoke. Her plants were all dead, but someone had clearly watered them for a while. There were photos of me on the fridge, some I didn't even remember being taken. A flyer from one of my speaking events was pinned to the corkboard with the words, "My baby girl," scrawled in faded red ink. In a box beneath her bed, I found a stack of letters. Some were opened, others sealed. They weren't for me. They were letters she'd written but never mailed, some to ex-friends, some to no one in particular. But one letter was addressed to the universe. In it, she wrote about how ashamed she felt for not being the mother I needed. How she hoped someday I'd forgive her. That she never regretted having me, only that she didn't know how to protect me from herself. It ended with a line I haven't stopped thinking about, "I am not the storm. I am the soil it rains on, hoping something good will grow." That broke me. After that day, something in me cracked open. Not all at once, grief doesn't work that way. But more like a door I'd long forgotten how to open had suddenly creaked ajar. I didn't fling it open. I just noticed the light spilling in through the edges. The days that followed were quiet. Too quiet, in that way death leaves a silence not just in a room but in the body. I stayed in Yonkers longer than I planned, sleeping on the pull-out couch in my mom's apartment, mostly because I didn't want to face my real life again, not yet. My job was understanding trauma, but my own had been shelved for so long, I didn't even recognize it anymore. I started sorting her things. Slowly. Carefully. Some part of me didn't want to disturb the life she left behind. Her apartment felt like she might come walking back in with a half-eaten bagel and a scratch-off ticket, humming Santana under her breath. That was how she existed. Loud, inconsistent, but somehow magnetic. Even in memory, she was hard to pin down. I found a small wooden box tucked behind her bookshelf, dusty and latched. Inside were dozens of receipts, handwritten notes, and torn-out pages from journals. At first, it just seemed like more clutter. But the more I read, the more I realized this was her record-keeping. A quiet ledger of people she'd helped. One note read, "Bus fare for Carla. Her son needed to get to Albany for the surgery." Another, "Mr. Hamid, envelope under his doormat. Told him it was a church fund. Didn't want thanks." And another, 5 checks, all anonymous. Took a second job to cover it. Worth it. Some were just names. Some were initials. A few had addresses scribbled beside them. Every entry had a purpose. Every note carried weight. It was like she was atoning in secret for things I still didn't understand. I called the hospital, pretending to be from a community outreach group. Asked if they remembered her. Most did. "Oh, Letty? Yeah, she was something else," one nurse laughed. "Gave you whiplash sometimes, but always had your back." "She brought me soup when I had COVID," another said. "Didn't even like me. Still brought me soup." "Didn't she give her bonus to the janitor whose wife died?" man, that woman never kept $1 for herself. I listened. I said thank you. I didn't say I was her daughter. I don't know why. Maybe because I still didn't know if I was proud. I wasn't ashamed, just overwhelmed. She had lived an entire second life. One I had no part in. One that maybe didn't include me on purpose. She was better for strangers than she had been for me. And that kind of truth hits harder than the lies we tell ourselves. One night, I was eating old Chinese takeout I found in her fridge and staring at her window blinds, when I remembered something, this odd memory from when I was maybe 15. She'd come home late, hands shaking, eyes red, like she'd been crying for hours. I thought she was drunk. She probably was. But she hugged me so tightly that night. Held me like she was trying to memorize the shape of me. Then she whispered, "One day, you'll know." Back then, I thought it was nonsense. Just another one of her melodramatic phrases she liked to throw around. But sitting there, surrounded by the chaos she left behind, I realized, I was beginning to know. Piece by painful piece. What came next was stranger. I began getting letters. Not many, maybe 5 total. But all from people I'd never met. The first was from a woman named Renata who said my mom used to come sit with her husband while he was dying of pancreatic cancer. He didn't have anyone left. She just showed up. Every week. No agenda. Another was from a guy named Noel, said he was incarcerated for 6 years and my mom used to send him crossword puzzles and handwritten poetry. She said everyone deserves words that weren't given in anger. Each letter undid a thread I thought had been woven tight in me. I wasn't looking for a saint. I knew better. My mother was infuriating. Irresponsible. Emotionally unpredictable. But maybe she didn't owe me perfection. Maybe she was just doing the best she could with the jagged pieces she had. I remember once, during one of our rare peaceful dinners, take out on the couch, an old rerun of the Golden Girls playing in the background, she said to me, "You can be broken and still be useful, Mija. Look at the damn stapler. Broken spring still holds paper together." At the time, I rolled my eyes. But now, it felt like a thesis statement. Her entire life reduced to a metaphor wrapped in sarcasm. I decided to clean out her closet next, half dreading the things I'd find. My mom kept clothes from decades ago. Shoulder pads. Fringe jackets. A "Don't Tell Me What to Do" t-shirt from 1993 that honestly still kind of slapped. Behind the clothes, in a taped-up shoebox, I found a picture of us. Not just a photo, the photo. The one from my 5th birthday. Me in a wonky paper crown, her holding a lopsided cake with the name RAYVN spelled wrong in red icing. I hated that photo for years. Told her she embarrassed me. But there it was. Framed in cheap gold plastic. Worn around the edges. She kept it. Not just kept it, preserved it. Behind the photo was a letter. This time, to me. The envelope read, "For when I'm finally quiet enough for you to hear me." I didn't open the letter right away. I stared at it for hours, literally hours, propped up on the nightstand like a ghost watching me from the other side of a cracked window. I'd always assumed that if she left me anything, it would be something confusing, self-pitying, maybe even manipulative. But this? It was just sitting there. Simple. No drama. Just her handwriting on a white envelope that looked like it had been handled too many times and never mailed. I waited until 2 a.m. when the world finally went still. No traffic, no neighbors, no emails to distract me. I sat on the floor with a glass of whiskey and tore it open with trembling fingers. She started with, "If you're reading this, I guess I finally shut up long enough for you to listen." I laughed. Out loud. It was the first time I'd laughed since she died. The letter was 3 pages long, written in blue ink on lined yellow legal paper. There were no apologies in the traditional sense. She didn't ask me to forgive her. But she did something else, something I didn't expect. She told me the truth. She wrote about how hard it was to be alone with a child when you never had a real mother yourself. About how she'd tried, then failed, then tried again. How she'd pushed me away not because she didn't want me close, but because she was terrified I'd end up seeing all her cracks and start blaming myself for them. You were the only good thing I made that didn't come from pain. And I didn't know what to do with something good. So I loved you weird. Backwards. Sloppy. Quiet. She explained why she took certain jobs, why she never stayed long, and why she sometimes picked strangers over me. That part stung the most. You were strong. They weren't. I thought you'd be okay without me. I didn't know that the way I was disappearing hurt you more than my presence ever could. By the time I finished reading, I couldn't breathe. I felt like I'd been holding my breath for 30 years and finally let it out. I pressed the paper to my chest like it was her hand. It wasn't closure, not exactly. It was recognition. And sometimes that's even more powerful. After that night, I started piecing her life together, like a puzzle with half the pieces chewed up by time and shame. I kept finding traces of her all over the city. People who remembered her, not the version I had locked in my memory, but someone fuller, more complex. She had volunteered at a needle exchange in the Bronx for 2 years. Donated blood regularly until they told her she was anemic and had to stop. Brought extra lunches to work for anyone having a bad day. She didn't tell people. She didn't post about it. It wasn't a performance. It was survival, and maybe penance. I even found a journal entry dated a year before she died. I don't need to be a good mother anymore. That ship sailed. But maybe I can be a good person before I go. I think that still counts for something. It wasn't written with pride. It was like she was bargaining with herself. Trying to rewrite a legacy she knew she couldn't fix in my eyes, but maybe could balance in the eyes of the universe. I started going through my own memory of her, not just the bad moments, but the little ones I'd tucked away and forgotten. Like how she used to warm towels for me in the dryer before my baths when I was little. Or how she would sit on the floor and brush my hair, muttering made-up fairy tales about witches who turned into birds. Or how she used to save the crusts from her sandwich, because Raven likes M. No one else ever noticed. But I did. And suddenly, those things weren't random anymore. They were her way of trying to love. Messy, mismatched, but genuine. At some point, I found myself walking through her old neighborhood. I went to the bodega she used to go to every morning. The guy behind the counter, George, remembered her. "Ah, Letty," he said, eyes lighting up. Used to argue with me over lottery numbers. But she always tipped. Always asked about my mom. He gave me a cup of coffee on the house. "She said you were a lawyer or something." "Social work," I corrected. "Even better. You're both soft people pretending to be hard." That stuck with me. More than it should have. It made me wonder, had we both spent our lives trying to look tougher than we felt? Her with her armor of sarcasm and mystical nonsense, me with my detachment and boundaries. Had we been more alike than I was ever willing to admit? She used to say, "You don't have to like me now. But one day, you might understand me." I hated that line. It felt like a cop-out. Now? I don't know. Maybe it was just a warning she was never going to be the mother I needed, but she was trying to be someone useful to the world, in the only way she knew how. And maybe, in her own chaotic way, she was trying to be useful to me too. I didn't set out looking for revenge. That's not what this story was supposed to be. But when I realized just how many people had benefited from my mother's kindness, and how loudly they stayed silent at her funeral, I started to feel something unfamiliar but unmistakably sharp, righteous anger. I wasn't the type to seek payback. Heck, I spent years in therapy learning how not to internalize other people's failures. But the audacity of it, the fact that my mother had quietly given so much of herself and was met with judgment, muttered insults, and whispered debts, something about that lit a slow, steady fire in me. Let's start with Mr. Capella, the landlord. He lived a few blocks away in a house that was falling apart as fast as his sense of decency. After the funeral, I went to his office under the guise of paying the 2 months' rent my mother owed. I handed him a check. He didn't even look up at me. "Figured you'd do the right thing," he muttered, stuffing it into a drawer. I smiled. "You know," I said, "it's interesting that a landlord with 6 code violations in a single building would talk about doing the right thing." That got his attention. I slid a manila envelope across his desk. Inside were photos, copies of inspection notices, tenant complaints, all public record. I had spent the last week digging through them. Not just out of spite, but because I knew my mom wasn't the only one who'd suffered under him. Mold. Broken locks. No heat during the winter. "I sent copies to the city," I said casually. "They've opened a case." He went pale. "You can't prove any of that came from me," he snapped. "You're right. I can't. But it doesn't matter, does it? You had plenty of chances to do the right thing. You just never thought anyone was watching." I stood, gave him one last look, and walked out. I didn't need to slam the door. The silence behind me said enough. Then there was Mrs. Blanding, the self-appointed queen of morality in my mom's building. She was always the loudest about my mother's drama, yet oddly quiet when free groceries appeared on her doorstep or someone shoveled her stairs after a snowstorm. When I learned my mom had done both those things without credit, I felt the tightness return to my chest. A week later, I visited the building's tenants association meeting. I told them I was Letitia's daughter. Some avoided my eyes. Others looked embarrassed. Mrs. Blanding sat right up front, smug as ever. "Letitia was complicated," she began. I interrupted her. "My mother paid your rent once. October 2019. She told the landlord it was from a church fund." The color drained from her face. Well, I didn't ask her to." "No, you didn't. And she never asked you to thank her either. But maybe you should have thought about that before you judged the way she lived." I didn't yell. I didn't need to. The silence around her did all the work for me. The others shifted in their seats. Whispers started. Not cruel, just honest. It was clear her reign of judgment was over. But the best revenge? That came later. I started something in her name. It wasn't huge. Just a community fridge on the corner of her block, stocked weekly with fresh produce, canned goods, baby formula, sanitary products. I used her savings, what little was left, to start it. Then I got a few neighbors involved. People who had stories about her. The quiet kind. The kind that sounded like small miracles. One man said she brought him soup when he was sick and left before he could say thank you. A woman said she once found an envelope of cash in her mailbox during eviction proceedings. Never found out who it was from. Now, every week, people leave handwritten notes on the fridge. In memory of Letitia. You mattered. To the woman who helped my sister find her way. You were the storm and the soil. Her face is painted on the side of the fridge now. Just a simple mural, her in a red scarf, laughing at something no one else can see. Below it, the words, "Loved loud. Gave quietly." I stood there one morning, cup of coffee in hand, watching a young mom take a carton of eggs from the fridge with shaking hands. She looked up at the mural and smiled. Whispered a thank you. She had no idea who Letitia was. But she didn't need to. That was the revenge. That was the justice. Not humiliating those who hated her. Not exposing their hypocrisy. But making sure that the woman they tried to shrink into a punchline would be remembered, exactly as she was. Flawed. Fierce. Giving. And unforgettable. I didn't need to rewrite her story. I just needed to make sure it was finally heard. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for both of us.